Story 1. For me, it would be, what if Leif Erikson maintained and grew a foothold in America? That would have been 500 years before the Columbus-driven age of discovery. Story 2. What if Teddy Roosevelt was nominated by the Grand Old Party for the 1912 election? He was popular enough that he might have won with the backing of the Republican Party, rather than the Bull Moose Party he tried to go with. Plus, he wouldn't be splitting the Republican vote, which is what let Wilson win. If he's president, being the ardent nationalist and interventionist that he is, there's a good chance that he persuades the American people to enter World War I earlier than in 1917. A lot of things change if that happens. An Entente victory before 1916, potentially. No Treaty of Versailles, possibly no Russian Bolshevik Revolution, or the Kerensky government is able to hold on to power. Maybe no Balfour Declaration, a different post-Ottoman map of the Middle East. The entire 20th century looks very different. Story 3. What if Neanderthals had become the dominant hominid instead of Homo sapiens? What if populations of Neanderthals and Denisovans had survived in isolated pockets in today's world? Story 4. In September of 2001, Hurricane Erin started to intensify and move north along the eastern coast of the United States. In the week or so before September 11th, forecasters were talking about the possibility of it hitting the Northeast, impacting areas like Washington, D.C., New York City, and Boston with high surf, rain, and wind. Sometime just before September 11th, the storm started weakening and changed course to move east. There are satellite pictures that show absolutely clear skies on September 11th, 2001, over New York. You can see the smoke plume from the towers, and there's just this massive Category 2 hurricane sitting offshore. I think about this a lot. Story 5. What if Vasily Arkhipov hadn't stopped the captain and political officer of submarine B-59 from launching a nuclear torpedo at the aircraft carrier USS Randolph during the Cuban Missile Crisis? This would have certainly initiated a war between the Soviet Union and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and most likely, either as a direct response to this incident or as a result of an escalating war, would have led to a full-scale nuclear exchange between the United States and the Soviet Union. The movie The Fog of War is well worth a watch. We came within an inch of nuclear war during the missile crisis. It's a sheer miracle nobody pressed the button. Castro had already recommended to the Soviet Union that the missiles present in Cuba be used at this point. The United States was at defense readiness condition too. Vasily Arkhipov single-handedly saved human civilization that day. It's not out of the question that he saved us from outright extinction. Story 6. The reason John Lennon's death was announced as it was is the result of sheer, rotten luck. When he was pronounced dead at the hospital, Yoko Ono didn't want the death to be announced immediately, so she had a chance to tell her son Sean what happened. Unfortunately, by sheer, rotten luck, a journalist for the American Broadcasting Company was in the hospital after crashing his motorbike and overheard the staff discussing it and immediately went to a payphone. The news spread like wildfire long before Yoko had the chance to tell her son, resulting in the news breaking on Monday Night Football. Story 7. One thing I've often wondered is what if Henry Wallace had been allowed to be the Democratic candidate and won, instead of having the Democratic National Committee push him out in favor of the much less progressive and more conservative Harry Truman. A real progressive president seems almost a fantasy in 2024, but to have one in the late 1940s would have possibly been a game changer for the nation, and who knows how much better off we'd be today if we had. I know it may not have been possible, but one can dream of what might have been. I guess also, what if Bobby Kennedy had lived and won the presidency in 1968? I feel like he could have been a force for good and would have been leagues better than Nixon was. Story 8. For America, what if Al Gore won in 2000? Or what if Reagan and the Republican Party didn't collude with each other and foreign governments to undermine Carter's presidency? Story 9. History technically only covers the past that is documented in writing, but I assume you mean in the past. The biggest what if is what if the asteroid did not wipe out the dinosaurs? What would have evolved to dominate the Earth? Story 10. What if Blücher had been a little bit late? Napoleon would have won at Waterloo but then been wiped out by the 400,000 Russians and Austrians that were on the way. This would have seen Russia in control of France quite possibly up until now. Story 11. What if Lenin never made it to Moscow in World War I? The Communist Revolution might never have happened, and the entire Cold War and everything around it would not be a thing. Story 12. Operation Unthinkable. The idea was that, at the end of World War II, what if the British and American forces attacked the Russians? The British did not think they could do it without the American forces. But think of how different the world would be today if they won or lost. Story 13. What if I gave that girl at PetSmart my number? It still kills me to this day. I mean, she was a beautiful woman. I was in the aisle, and she came by looking like an absolute model with her hair done up. We stopped and talked for about 10 to 12 minutes about reptiles. She kept smirking and giving me this face, like I was going to ask her out while talking about my new running shoes. I told her that hair clip was really pretty, and she blushed. I had my hands behind my back like Shikamaru in Naruto. Honestly, I messed up so badly. She had a Turkish accent and dark red hair, brunette and classy, and long too. That was love in the making, and I absolutely fumbled it. Moral of the story: if it feels too amazing to be true, see it through. Edit. I saw what if moment, and my attention deficit disorder summoned this moment out of my head. No, it does not fit history, but it is a what if. Story 14. What if England, Spain, Portugal, and others just kept to themselves and were content with their expanse of land? It's interesting to think about the undoing of centuries of cultural blending and molding of diverse cultures, and how it would change the complete course of history for so many countries. Story 15. What if the man attempting to assassinate Franklin D. Roosevelt in Miami in 1933 had succeeded? Giuseppe Zangara, the assassin, was too short to see over the crowd and get a proper aim at Franklin D. Roosevelt. He had to stand on a wobbly metal folding chair. He missed Franklin D. Roosevelt and instead shot the mayor of Chicago. The attempt took place at what is now the Bayfront Park Amphitheater in downtown Miami. Story 16. What if the American Revolution fails? What if the War of 1812 does not end in a stalemate? What if all of Africa successfully prevented Europe from colonizing their continent and carving it up for themselves? What if the Ottoman Empire does not break up? Story 17. What if God is whoever programmed the simulation that we are in and sprinkled in bits and pieces of truth into our brains so we would develop similar religious beliefs that have us preparing for the end of times? The end is the singularity. Judgment Day from the Bible is a reference to it. Everything is progressing towards this point in time. Story 18. Drew Bledsoe getting knocked out of a game early in the 2001 season allowed an unknown second-year player, former sixth-round pick, Tom Brady, to become the greatest of all time. If Bledsoe hadn't gotten hurt, Brady could have been riding the bench and out of the league in 6 years. Story 19. What if women weren't oppressed throughout history and had the same rights as men consistently? We'd have so many more female historical figures. How many inventions, ideas, legacies, and discoveries never happened because women were mostly not allowed to partake in education, warfare, sciences, leadership, and more? How different would the world be today if half the population was allowed to flourish? I think about this a lot. Story 20. What if that shooter in Butler, Pennsylvania, didn't miss? Would we still have Joe Biden as the nominee? Would the far right in America have gone ballistic? Who would have become the Republican nominee? Would we have finally felt a little bit of peace in an election for once? Story 21. What if religion was never created? I have a personal history, what if that's huge, which is what if I hadn't tried heroin at 16? I got clean at 33 9 years ago. I really wonder what if on that, to be honest. But I like my life now, so it's not in a morbid way. It literally is I wonder what my life would have been. Story 22. What if son of Yaga didn't notice this little detail? If you put the dry little things in the ground and pour drinking stuff on it, green yummy things come out of there after the high bright god runs away and comes back many times. Story 23. What if Ivan the Terrible did not accidentally kill his oldest living son and heir in a fit of rage, thus leading to instability in Russia that led to the House of Romanov, who would later be overthrown in the 1917 revolution? Story 24. For me, it's about what if September 11th never happened and what effects it would have today. Would there be fewer precautions or security? September 11th caused many changes to how this country functions. Story 25. Saying it would have been interesting is perhaps the wrong word. But how Europe, then ultimately the world, would have been shaped had the Nazis won. Would they have kept it all together? How would their social policies have changed over time? How much land would they have conquered? What would the Western world look like today? Would they have helped Japan form an Eastern empire? Would they have persuaded or supported Mexico to invade the United States? There are so many what-ifs that it is terrifying but also intriguing to think about. Story 26. To me, it would have to be, what if they had set the whole atmosphere on fire in an out-of-control nuclear detonation test the very first time they tested the bomb? Story 27. What if Franz Ferdinand's car took the wrong path to the hospital, stalled, and he was assassinated, a catalyst event that triggered World War I, which may have happened anyway, just for your information. So, what if the driver took the new route he was supposed to, but was not informed of? What if the car didn't stall? Story 28. What if all the ancient civilizations able to build massive stone buildings and structures didn't just disappear a few thousand years ago? Göbekli Tepe, 9000 BCE. Stonehenge, 3000 BCE. Karnak stones, 3300 BCE. Ancient Egypt, 3150 to 330 BCE. Modern man's progression in technology and overall development seems isolated from thousands of sites across the world that show ancient people were a lot more advanced than we give them credit for just because we weren't around to claim ownership over what was accomplished. There's still a lot we don't know about our own history. So what if we did? Story 29. What if Hitler didn't fail in the end and was still alive today, having finished what he started on the rest of the entire world? And what would it look like in America? Story 30. I always wonder how the outcome of World War II would have changed if the Russian Revolution never happened and Russia didn't industrialize like they did under Stalin. Story 31. What if World War I never happened? Basically, everything that happened over the past 100 years is a result of World War I. World War I led to the creation of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the establishment of the United States of America as a global superpower, and World War II, which led to the Cold War, the Soviet War in Afghanistan, the Central Intelligence Agency funding the Mujahideen, Al-Qaeda, the September 11th attacks, and the War on Terror. World War I also led to Nazi Germany, World War II, the Holocaust, Israel, and the conflict between Israel and Palestine. These are just examples. I could make multiple tangents on how World War I indirectly or directly led to basically any historical fact post-1919. Story 32. What if the Jews were given 10% of Germany to create a homeland? What if Columbus saw native culture as just as human as European culture and cooperated with them instead of enslaving them? What if American slaves were Slavic instead of African? Story 33. What if Genghis Khan died during one of the countless moments of him having plot armor? And thus you would have a China divided in two, a bigger Georgian empire, a more thriving Balkan region, Russia that never unites as it did in our world and instead fractures more, and a mess in Iran. Story 34. When the Berlin Wall was torn down, things were extraordinarily peaceful, but it just as easily could have been a bloodbath. There were tens of thousands of Soviet troops in East Germany, and there was some dissent within the ranks in a splintering union of Soviet socialist republics. Commander Boris Snetkov disagreed with the withdrawal of troops and was replaced abruptly by a new commander who only had a few months to execute a withdrawal and not disrupt the dissolution of the East/West Germany split. Many troops preferred and were loyal to Snetkov, and they could have easily been instructed to detain or even shoot those who came over the wall or through it as it was torn down, and it could have been a much bloodier and divisive moment in history. Story 35. How would World War I have started if Archduke Franz Ferdinand hadn't been assassinated? Europe was a powder keg, but history would have been very different if his car didn't stop outside the wrong sandwich shop. Story 36. What if Babylonian invasions of Judea in the 6th century before Common Era had killed every Hebrew instead of most of them? No Judaism means no Christianity and no Islam. Certainly, there would be other religions instead, and some might resemble these, but none of them would have been the same. What many call the Holy Land now would just be another region in the Middle East. Story 37. What if Napoleon won in Russia? I think Europe would be a completely different place today. He actually had a chance of winning. I think we would see the formation of some form of de facto European Union, which would exclude the British Empire. His next step was to finish the war in Spain and attack British colonies. Unless assassinated, I believe he would win eventually, and the British would be stuck in an arms race they could not win. There would probably be no unified Germany or Italy, no communism, and no World War I. The Ottoman Empire would be dismantled earlier as well. I cannot see how things would go past the 19th century, but I honestly believe if Napoleon won, the world would be a better place. Story 38. It's what if Genghis Khan had not died before the Mongols conquered Western Europe. Leaving Western Europe intact led to a lopsided development gap that segued into the colonial era. All of subsequent world history would be very different one way or another.